The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, education, and literature. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they had been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe Brown, Jr., and with us today is Bill Rhoden, sports journalist from the New York Times and author of the new book, $40 Million Slaves. Now, what does $40 Million Slaves say, and what's been the reaction to it?
Well, let's see.
I like the title, by the way.
The title is very stunning, but the title comes from a comment that Larry Johnson, used to play for the Knicks. In 1999 when they had the championship series, he had boycotted the media. And so he was fined. Stern was fined. You got to talk. You got to talk. He didn't talk. So finally, he said, "Okay, you want me to talk? I'll talk." So he had also, he continued to blast the media, just blast them for being everything from being bigoted to. Then he said, "You know what? The only people I care about are my teammates down there in the court." So on this team, we're a bunch of rebellious slaves. So the next day, of course, he was like, out of all stuff he said, they just killed him about that. Well, so the next season, the Knicks were playing a game in against the Clippers in Los Angeles. So there was this white fan who had been heckling them all. So during the timeout, as the Knicks walked to the bench, this white guy said, "Johnson, you're nothing but a $40 million slave." And so Don Chaney told us, and I thought it was very interesting that this fan remembered what John said from a year ago, but B, I thought it was very interesting that Larry Johnson would choose that particular metaphor to try to get these reporters to understand how he saw his relationship to power. So, we pulled that out. The editor, actually, Chris Jackson's a good brother, he pulled it out. And at first I was like, wow, man, that's pretty jarring. But then, I thought, you know what, it really cuts right to the heart of what we're talking about. What is your I mean, we've grown, the book starts on a plantation with plantation athletes, plantation boxers, runners, rowers, and the question is kind of raised is, has the relationship between those slave athletes and their owners fundamentally changed from then and now between these athletes and their owners? And the answer is kind of, well, in many ways, it really hasn't. As far as the reaction goes, I was at the Atlanta Falcons training camp in August, and Algie Crumpler and Warwick Dunn walked in, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Rhoden, man, we just got your book, man, we're reading it." And the guy at the Jacksonville Jaguars bought about 40 copies and had me come down there and talk to some of the players. So, and I know the reaction for just the community. I mean, people, the reviews have been outstanding from the community. People are, wow, this is really, it's historically very interesting. And wow, I haven't really, I think the kind of people like, to the extent they're reading it, I think people are kind of like, it's a lot to digest, so maybe just kind of waiting, So I really haven't had any reaction like, man, this is, why'd you call? I think some people looked at the cover and said, well, slave, why you slave? But then I think when they start reading it, so I'm not calling you slaves. I'm just questioning your relationship to power, and really I'm saying that you guys have so much power, man. I mean, it's what you guys could do together, because So anyway, it's really. And we could probably talk about it, but it's really, it's suggesting how we as athletes are a metaphor for what we as black people have to do in the 21st century. We got to get back to kind of doing things together.
Well, going back to put everything in perspective, this is really a 20th century phenomenon. Black athletes didn't really begin to be recognized until the 20th century, and then when Jack Johnson won the title, they took it away from him and so on. And it wasn't until 1936 when Jesse Owens won the Olympics, and 34, 35, 38 when Joe Louis began to be the world champion, that people began to say, look, the black athletes can really do it as well as whites, because the question at that time was, could they even do it as well? But now, clearly, they could do it as well as whites. And then Jackie comes in 47, and enters the most prejudiced sport of them all, Major League Baseball, which excluded blacks. And then by the time the 60s developed, the 70s, 25% of the ball players were African Americans, and the basketball 50%. And you remember at one time in basketball you couldn't have more than 3 black players on the field the court at one time, and that was in the 50s and early 60s.
That's right. You had one. You would have the formula would be you have one great star. You know. No role players. Remember, like we're on the bench. You know, forget that. You either played, you either starred, or you out of it. Yeah, one girl I was Roscoe about 8 years ago when I was just beginning the book. She said, you know, like doing Black History or something. So at the end of it, she said, "Well, Mr. Rhoden, who was the first white player to integrate the NBA?" You know? And so, you know, but it's like, and I was stunned. But you know, for a lot of kids. Who were born after 1970, everything you talked about, I mean, you lived a lot of this stuff, was irrelevant. I mean, the idea that somebody couldn't play basketball was like completely a foreign concept.
Well, this is really, in terms of the larger society with African Americans, people like myself and people like you understand how far we have come and how impatient we are because we haven't gone further. Many of the young African Americans think that things were always this way, that we always had the opportunity, that if you're good, you're going to make it. And of course, that really still isn't true.
Well, you know, and you say that, I mean, that's, and I guess I came out of this book, I mean, it took me 8 years to write it. And I remember talking to Dr. Franklin, John Hope Franklin, at the very end. And he said something that was a little depressing, because, you know, John Hope was like 90 years old, 91 years old. And he said, you know, the more I see about this, the more pessimistic I get. You know, I hope just because, you know. And I was thinking the same thing, is that I had no idea. I mean, you know, I grew up in the 60s and all that, and I knew about racism, that kind of stuff. But, you know, the depth, I guess I had no idea of just how deeply entrenched this racism is just in throughout the pores and just the fiber of, I mean, how it's just everywhere, you know. And so now, at first, you know, I used to tell somebody, I mean, you know, I would never use all this racism. I'd explain, I said, now, you know, it's kind of what it is. I mean, the reason that the press boxes are still predominantly white, and we're getting worse, and I guess that's my point. We made progress, but it's almost like we're on a merry-go-round. Where, you know, you kind of go round and round and the horses go up and down, it seems so exciting and all that stuff, but when it stops, you get off and you're really at the same place you were, you know, you haven't gone anywhere, you know. And I think, yes, have we made progress? We made, in other words, the whole premise of our existence is wrong, like about Jackie Robinson and all that. Everybody knew that we could play baseball.
Yeah, that's right.
Everybody knew, I mean, so the premise was wrong to begin with, you know. So we spent all this time trying to prove that we can play baseball, prove that we can. Well, we already knew. If you look at the Harlem Wrens, everybody knew that we could play baseball, probably better than them.
The first world champion.
Yeah, the first world champion. Yeah, and people. So I guess the idea is, once you start getting back in history, and I think a lot of our young people, whether it's my book, your book, other, you know, and you get in history, say, wait a minute, you know, the whole premise of this stuff was flawed. So maybe you get some power from knowing that you were always a substantive people. It's the definition has always been wrong.
See, the dilemma for African Americans is, do you get mad or do you get even?
How do you get even? That's the question.
And then the question is, how do you get even?
How do you get even?
And with the business opportunities, you know, some blacks who made lots of money in various kinds of businesses, that's in part getting even. But even there, because of racist policies and financial equity and investment and so on, it keeps this multi-billion-dollar market of African Americans controlled by the white business community. So this is the dilemma we face. Now, I'm not quite with John Hope that I get depressed. I get angry.
Right.
But I think anger motivates us to find ways of challenging the system.
I would love for our kids to get angry.
What?
I would love for our kids. I mean, you talk about anger. I mean, you know, somebody suggested it seems like our threshold of getting angry is like, what does it take?
And that has to do with how do we work together. See, I come out of the civil rights movement as a Tuskegee Airman. We were going to break the barriers. We stunk together, and we wrote together, and we flew together, and so on. Now we don't have as much of this collective action. Once the civil rights movement reached its peak and we got desegregation, some integration, our collective anger, our collective activity diminished. Now, you say in the book, something I found very interesting, that the African American athletes, with all of the money that they have at their disposal, got together and organized. They could buy teams, they could own teams, they could control what happens to them. Now, I know the answer, but I want to hear your reflection on that. Why doesn't this happen?
See, I think it goes right back to what you're saying about desegregation, integration. As much as I love Jackie and knew what kind of a hell of a guy he had to be to do that, I think that integration basically it threw cold water on that whole movement. Because remember, the movement from almost our whole sense of survival here has been because of what? Of us doing stuff together, this movement. Well, I think that what integration has done is basically it's kind of created this exclusionary thing, and we see it with a lot of our kids. So they say, okay, all right, we're going to take you in this institution, we're going to take you, we're going to take you, you know, and they take you, so you have this kind of group of black people who kind of thinking they're kind of elite, because it's you. So it becomes individual. It becomes, rather than the collective, it becomes the individual. And I think that we've had about 3 decades of individual stuff, you know, and it happens with that. And athletics, I think, is a metaphor of that. The individual thing, me. I've got my foundation. I got my move. But
again, put it in context. At a time when you couldn't be there, and white folks didn't want you there, said you couldn't do it, someone had to step up and do it.
Right.
And having been in that situation myself, it is hurtful. I mean, you take a lot, and as they say, you do it for the race. Now, the thing that you're talking about, you have to get past your own individual contribution and look at the larger picture. The larger picture being that even though some blacks have been allowed to move in the sports industry, into medicine, into education, still there is a barrier, sort of a cultural and economic barrier that keeps African Americans from moving into the mainstream in a direct proportion. Well, why is it that in New York City only 3% of the firemen are black? Oh, right. Now that's institutional racism.
Exactly.
It's not anything that's aimed at Bill Rhoden or Roscoe Brown. It's institutional racism. How do you deal with that? And when you deal with that collectively, you do sometimes lose your ability to penetrate. What you say, I'm in a collective thing, you don't want to talk to Bill Rhoden, because Bill Rhoden's a troublemaker. And that's the kind of thing that plays off. So how do we get people to go past that idea that when you work together, you're a troublemaker?
That's the $1 million question. I mean, because really, right. and in sports, I keep saying, see, and sports is sort of this great metaphor for that, because even in the NBA, where you look and you see 70% of the players are African American, as soon as you start moving off the court, it gets into, might as well be the police department or the fire department, because we talk about vice presidents, the power positions, the people who call the shots. You know, it's like you know, maybe 1% black, if that, and that's a lot. And I'm talking about if you go into marketing, advertising, you know, vertically, you know, horizontally, you know, and the question is, well, how do we do this? You know, and I think that's going to be the question of the 21st century, is what constitutes winning in the 21st century. And you know, when you were 16 years old, let's just go back to when you were 16. If somebody would have told you, Roscoe, you know, there's going to be the owner of the team, there's going to be a black billionaire, he's going to own a professional sports team, there's going to be a guy named Michael Jordan who's going to have all these advertisements. I mean, if somebody would have laid out where you are now, you would figure, wow, I get back to the fields and keep playing because we got hope, you know, you know. But then when you get there, you say, wow, it's another trick bag, because although you got this, it's all individual. It's not, you got more black men in prison than you do in college, you know. So it's, although individual, and that's why I get back individually, it's okay, but collectively, we're losing. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So in the way I saw this book, almost as a team meeting. You know, you're on a team, and you guys, you got all the components to have a great team, but you start off 0-10. And so you said, wait a minute, you call a team meeting, no coaches, no, you know, just players. Listen, you're the rookie of the year, you're the lead scorer, you're the lead rebounder, but yet we're 0-17. Something's not right. And with black people, that's what I'm saying, particular athletes, we've got more money than ever before, more compensation, but we're losing. Something's not right.
Well, this gets into the role of the media, and particularly the role of African Americans in the media. There are a few African Americans who have penetrated to high places in the media. And you have an opportunity to write, you have an opportunity to raise consciousness. To what extent does what you write impact on African Americans in terms of their willingness to challenge the system? And to what extent does it cause whites to really recognize just how racist the system has been? To what extent do those things happen?
I think that what I found out about the latter point, I just think there's a blindness there, you know, in terms of whites recognize. I mean, it's almost like being the right to a God. I mean, you lose perspective. I mean, you can't see it, you know, and you just become, you know, this malcontent. And I've been just more focused in trying to mobilize African American people. I mean, all people of goodwill understand that you can't have a country that claims to be the great democracy with the distribution of wealth being out of whack like it is now. So I think there are a lot of people who understand that this, you know, is just not.
But see, you hit on something that might be possible. And I know in some of our revolution days we talked about it. Poor white folks don't do so well in this country either.
Right.
The gap between the rich and the poor, white or black, is tremendous. And the question is, how do you get people who have similar needs to come together? Because with 10% of the population, African Americans ought to have 10% of whatever the distribution is. Actually, we have 1% or 1/10 of 1%. So when you write this, what kind of reaction do you get from other black folks about what you're writing?
Well, and I think this book will probably be the litmus test.
Sure will.
Is I think there are a lot of, you know, I was on a panel with a basketball player, Eton Thomas, you know, who's with the Washington Wizards. He's been very outspoken against the war and all that. And he was saying that when he did his anti-war demonstration, all that, so during a game, a couple of guys would come up to him and say, "Yeah, Eton, that's pretty good, man. I really was down with you." But now they would never say it publicly, you know. You know, and I think that's kind of the way it is, because everybody's got their, you know, people have jobs you want to protect and that kind of stuff. But, you know, going back to what you were saying, though, and it's something we were saying kind of before the show about, there are a lot of white people who are in this same predicament. But because the system has managed to tell them, listen, just being white, the mere fact of whiteness gives you a leg up, you know. So that's your piece of the pie. So I think a lot of those people who really should kind of join together with freedom movements, they kind of say, well, no, I can't really be down with black folks because, you know, we're better than that. I say, well, you really aren't. You're just, that's the great thing about Curt Flood. Remember Curt Flood?
Yeah. He was the one who broke the reserve clause.
And he said, listen, he said, we're all on a plantation. And a lot of white players kind of were stopped because they had never really understood that you may be in the big house and I may be field, but we're all on the same plantation. I think, and that's why the house came tumbling down. And I think the people in power understand that too. If there was ever that kind of understanding of people that we're all on this plantation, nobody's free. I think that's when you're going to have the really beginning of real reform.
Something happened with the unions. Remember, athletes were not unionized 30, 40 years ago. So the union began to put the athletes in a position where they confront the management, and it has created these millionaires you're talking about. But it hasn't gone to the next level in terms of decision-making and involvement and ownership. Now, what's your next book?
I'm actually doing, it's kind of finished. It's an oral history of black quarterbacks. That's been really fascinating.
Now, why did you pick black quarterbacks?
Because that position, probably more so than any other position of any other sport in the world, that position, I think, and the lack of blacks playing that position, I think speaks in many ways to a lot of stuff we've been talking about, just about how we're not seen as leaders. You know, we're not seen as people who could rally the people. And we're in 2006, and it's still a phenomenon. I mean, we're still talking about hoping that we can get our third black quarterback in the league. I mean, even with Vince Young. You know, you look at Vince Young, and this guy, if everybody was watching the USC-Texas game, everybody said, this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
This is phenomenal. We figured if the draft was done the next day, he'd be number one. But all of a sudden, after about a couple months, we start hearing about his test. You know, the Wonderlic test, and he's got low scores, has LC, he's just nothing but an athlete. I mean, you know, so it hasn't really ended. So it's to me, studying, and I'm going all the way back to Sadat Singh at Syracuse, George Taliaferro, you know, all the way to, you know, James Harrison, Joe Gillum, and, you know, it's still a very interesting study. And to talk to these guys, man, has been very, you know, it's almost like if I was talking to Tuskegee Airmen, in terms of talking to this group of people who exceptionally talented, and but for the color of their skin, could have done extraordinary things. And so I think it's a great American tale of race and overcoming.
Your book, I know it's been on the New York Times bestseller list. How can the public access it? Is there a website where they can purchase a book or a bookstore?
You go to Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble.
Human Bookstore.
Go to Human Bookstore. Or go to your local black bookstore.
Heard.
But if one's not closed, you go to Barnes & Noble. And you go on the web and, you know, Amazon.com.
As we come to the close of the show, what advice would you have for African-American men and women who want to get into sports journalism?
It's a great field. Be ready for a long, hard fight. You know,
tell me about that long, hard fight. What are some of the elements of that long, hard fight?
Long, hard fight, man. It's just, there are not a lot of us in this field.
Right.
And it's a great gig. It's one of the it's the last country club in the newsroom.
Oh,
that
really?
and being the foreign correspondent, which is why it's so hard to get in. Just think about it. If you love sports and you love to write, that's what you do 365 days a year. You go to a sporting event. You know, I wrote a column the other day, you know, Keep Joe, you know, by Joe Torre.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're getting paid for that, you know, and you get paid to watch the match. So it's a great gig, and people are really covetous about that. I think that the way to get it, and you know, it's another show, you know. But if you know a black journalist, if you see one, whether it's me or Mike Will, call them. Call me at the New York Times. You know, just call them. Say, listen, you know, I'm brother, I'm sister. I want to get in this business. You know, could you, you know, I'm going to give you a mailing address. How do I start? You know?
How do they start? How did you start?
I started at the Afro. I started at the Afro-American newspaper in Baltimore.
Baltimore, because you went to Morgan State.
I went to Morgan State, and my mentor was Sam Lacey, the great sports editor of the Afro-American news since 1942. I started at the Afro-American newspaper. I was a sports information director, assistant sports information director at Morgan. I was always writing for the school newspaper. I was writing for the high school newspaper. You know, I mean, I felt when I finally got paid for it, I said, "What do you mean? You get paid for this?" I probably felt the same way some athletes do when they got. I guess somehow getting your foot in the door, and now, although newspapers are beginning to kind of be dinosaurs, I think now with the web and with blogging and with the internet, I think that there's been this whole other world that's opened up. That's kind of not necessarily writing for you. What you can do among yourselves, or you're a group of people, you know, the only thing you need is access. You need credentials to watch the games. But I think that although the newspaper industry might be shutting down and shrinking, I think in this whole industry of blogging and podcast and that kind of stuff, the possibilities are really endless. We just have to figure out how we can make a mint. But I think that you know, journalism is wherever you are, and I think now, I mean, you've got stuff today in terms of getting messages out there that, you know, remember I mean, you know, if you didn't write for a newspaper where somebody could see it, it didn't exist.
Now, you talked about getting messages out there. As a sports journalist, do you really try to get a message, or do you try to reflect what's happening in the sports world?
Both. I think it's to me it's both. As you could tell, I'm kind of opinionated and can talk. To me, it's about It's about the message. It's about reflecting. It's about reflecting. You know, I mean, when something is, it's about, you know, it's not so much, it's reflecting, but putting everything in some type of perspective, I think. Some things demand very little perspective. Some things demand great perspective. And I think the older you get,
the more perspective
you have, if you're not an idiot, you know. But I think that's that's the great thing about, you know, aging gracefully, as you have done, as hopefully I'm in the process of doing, is that your context continues to expand if you just keep your eyes open. So, and I think being a columnist gives you that sort of latitude to do that, but you do have to, it's not just about sports. You know, you got to, it's
about the world, it's about the society, it's about personality. Today on African American Legends, we've been talking with Bill Rhoden, the author of $40 Million Slaves, and he's given us a great perspective on the role of sports in the United States of America and the world. Thanks for being with us today, Bill.
Roscoe, thanks for having me.
Okay, buddy.
All right.